Of the Public Safety Committee, an emergency meeting called on the request of 4 members. A motion passed earlier today to study policing and the issue of systemic racing, and we're fortunate today to have with us Minister Bill Blair, a frequent person before this committee, along with Commissioner Lucki. I understand that, Minister Blair, you have a 10-minute opening statement.
I do, Mr. Chair, and thank you. And I'd also like to take the opportunity to thank the members of the committee for their kind invitation to have the opportunity to speak before you. And as we speak, we know as well that important discussions are taking place in communities and provinces right across Canada and around the world on the issue of systemic racism within the criminal justice system. I think this is a very important issue, and I am very grateful that SECU has decided to take this particular issue on at this most critical time. And I'm pleased to have the opportunity to contribute to your discussion. We have seen shocking video footage of George Floyd's death, and that footage has galvanized people to raise their voices in protests like perhaps never before. And while the protest movement began south of the border, the demonstrations have soon spread to Canada as well, and they have compelled us to take a deep and serious look at the issue of systemic racism and the impact it has on Canadians here at home. As the Prime Minister has said, it is something that touches every corner and every person in our country. And there's no doubt that Indigenous people, Black Canadians, and other racialized people experience systemic racism and disparate outcomes within the criminal justice system. That system includes all of our police services, including the National Police Force, the RCMP, for which I am responsible within the government. And as you know, RCMP Commissioner, who I'm very fortunate to have joining me here today, has acknowledged that systemic racism is part of every institution in Canada, the RCMP included. And I commend her for that acknowledgement. And I support the important work that she is doing to reform the RCMP, including her efforts to increase diversity and inclusion in decision-making, training, and recruitment. And I'd also want to express my sincere and profound appreciation to the members of the RCMP who serve Canadians with integrity, dedication, and professionalism every day. The RCMP has a very strict, bias-free policing policy that guides the actions of its members in every interaction that they have with the public. And this policy is based on the principles of equality and non-discrimination, and therefore it is an important step forward. But it's also important to acknowledge when individuals do not live up to that bias-free policing policy, and there must be strict accountability. I have, as many of you know, spent most of my life in public service, and for almost 4 decades, I served my community as a police officer, including 10 as the Chief of Police for Canada's most populous city. And I can tell you from firsthand experience that the overwhelming majority of police officers in this country do conduct themselves in an exemplary manner, and they make every effort to minimize the use of force. The goal of every police officer must be always to protect and maintain public safety and keep our citizens safe. The highest duty is the preservation of all life. But we would not be having this discussion today if everything was perfect, if this happened flawlessly on each and every occasion. Systemic racism is a reality in Canada, and when it occurs, I have no intention and will not defend the indefensible. Let me be very clear. Discrimination on the basis of race or as a result of any other form of bias is unacceptable and abhorrent. But it is not merely unacceptable and abhorrent, it is unlawful. It's contrary to the Charter of Human Rights and Freedoms, and it's contrary to the Canadian Human Rights Act. It cannot be tolerated within policing or in any other aspect of our justice system. We cannot shy away from uncomfortable truths. We must do more, and we must do better. Our policing services must be committed to ensuring that they are worthy of the trust that all Canadians put in them to protect us. Maintaining that trust requires rigorous accountability. And when there appears a suggestion of misconduct, for example, when an officer appears to have exceeded their authority, used excessive force, or acted in a biased or discriminatory way, it must be quickly investigated. And if they are found to have broken the law, they need to be held strictly to account. There are processes and oversight mechanisms in place to ensure that these things happen. These mechanisms are important, and I will continue to support and uphold their use. I will also continue to speak with racialized community members and Indigenous leaders across the country about the concerning incidents that have taken place over the past several weeks, as well as the newly released data on RCMP's use of intervention options. These discussions are critical to ensuring that our policing services serve everyone with the dignity and the respect that they deserve. And it is more important than ever that we acknowledge the lived experience of those who have experienced racism or discrimination at the hands of the police and work to put a stop to this injustice. And while we will continue to engage with individuals and groups, Canadians expect concrete action. And that's why I will continue to pursue my mandate priorities in this area. One of those priorities is to ensure that all officials in Canada's law enforcement and security agencies have access to unconscious bias and cultural competency training. Another is to co-develop a legislative framework that recognizes First Nations policing as an essential service and ensure that police services are culturally appropriate and reflect the communities that they serve. I will have more to say at this, perhaps during the questions that you may ask. We have already committed to investing up to $291 million in the First Nations policing program, which provides federal funding for professional, dedicated, and culturally responsive policing services in hundreds of First Nation and Inuit communities. That federal funding commitment is ongoing, and it includes an annual increase to keep up with inflation, providing greater financial stability for communities. And, of course, that's on top of recent funding to improve police facilities in First Nation and in Inuit communities, such as improving detachments and communication systems. And that means funding for 185 police agreements under the First Nations policing program, policing a First Nations and Inuit population of roughly 432,000 people. This includes support for more than 1,300 police officer positions in over 450 First Nations and Inuit communities. I want to be clear that the First Nations policing program has been a program for more than 3 decades in this country. It needs to become an essential service, and it is our intent to co-develop with Indigenous communities and Indigenous leadership across Canada a new legislative framework for the delivery of culturally appropriate, professional, and effective police services. We will work with and respect the jurisdiction and authority of First Nations across this country to ensure that they have the policing services that they need and that they deserve. I look forward to working with interested communities to expand the number that are currently served by First Nations policing. And I'd also like to note that the government continues the important work to advance the calls for justice in its final report of the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. And this includes the calls for justice related very specifically to policing. Following the release of the inquiry's interim report, for example, the Public Safety Department funded reviews of police policies and practices to identify gaps and challenges in the delivery of culturally competent policing services. The government has invested $1.25 million over 2 years for 4 external organizations with expertise in law enforcement and policing to lead these reviews. The reports have also made recommendations and identified tools, resources, and promising practices that may be helpful in fostering a more trusting relationship and building confidence in police service. Their final reports will be made available on the Public Safety website in the very near future, and one of those reports is currently available on our website. The findings and recommendations from this review will also be an important source of information for key law enforcement partners, such as the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police. And finally, Mr. Chair, we are also taking steps to increase transparency in police interactions through the adoption of body-worn cameras across the RCMP. Body-worn video creates greater accountability while also providing excellent evidence and first-person view of what a police officer encounters, often in highly dynamic and potentially tense situations. The RCMP piloted body-worn cameras in a number of different environments, and we will continue to build upon this experience as well as examine the experience in other jurisdictions. We're currently working on the policy framework that will support their more widespread use, ensuring that this technology is also and always remains respectful of Canadians' privacy interests. we will move forward with implementing body-worn cameras as quickly as possible. Mr. Chair, as I've made clear, there is no room for racism or discrimination of any kind in any of Canada's law enforcement agencies and institutions. We are working hard, and we will continue to work harder to make our systems more just. And we have taken some steps in the right direction, but let me acknowledge there is much more work to do. And that's why I will continue to work with Commissioner Lucki as she strives to make the RCMP a more just and accountable police service, where diverse voices and perspectives are valued and included to create a better and safer environment in the communities that they serve. And I would thank you once again for your kind invitation. I look forward to seeing the results of the deliberations, this committee's deliberations on this important topic, and I'd now be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you, Minister Blair. Minister Blair will be here with us for the balance of the hour. Commissioner Lucki will be here for the entire 2 hours. As I understand it, Commissioner Lucki will be making a statement at the beginning of the second hour. Is that correct? With that, we'll go to our first round of questions of 6 minutes each. Mr. Uppal, Madame Damoff, Madame Michaud, and Mr. Angus. So each have 6 minutes. Excuse me, Mr. Paulus, for the first 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Avant de commencer mes questions, j'aimerais...
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before starting with my questions, I want to start by stating that the Conservative Party of Canada recognizes that there's a problem with systemic racism in Canada. Minister, it has been nearly 5 years since your government has been in power. We had Mr. Goodale before you, and you've been in place since last year. These problems related to racism in Canada have been ongoing. I want to know, in terms of the RCMP specifically, what measures have you taken over the past 5 years?
Well, thank you. And frankly, the Commissioner is here and will perhaps be able to better articulate than I the steps that she's specifically taken. But I'd point out that Commissioner Lucki was appointed specifically and given a mandate and a task to deal with discrimination and workplace harassment and a number of very significant issues that had previously been identified within the RCMP. And she's now completed 2 years of that task. She's recently shared with me a report of the work that has been undertaken. And so there has been a number of significant steps in the training of police officers serving in diverse and Indigenous communities. There has been, I think, a very sincere effort that has been made by the RCMP to recruit people of more diverse backgrounds, and so a number of steps, significant steps have been taken. I would also point out that through the development of a number of important bodies, not the least of which was building out the Civilian Complaints Review Commission, and empowering them has also been important.
Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Ministre.
Thank you, Minister, but actually you're simply putting the question on Ms. Lucki. She's there for 2 years, but you as a government, you've been there. Have you taken any measures from the beginning? Did you address this issue? Because I know that in Ms. Lucki's mandate, there were certain clauses pertaining to discrimination, but you don't have the same version of facts that we heard 2 weeks ago. So from a political perspective, when we're talking about the RCMP in terms of your portfolio as Minister of Public Safety, has it always been an issue, systemic racism, that is?
Let me explain it this way, Mr. Paulus. When we look at the criminal justice system, like many aspects of Canadian society, we see disparate outcomes, grossly disproportionate outcomes for Indigenous communities, racialized communities, young black men in our society, where they are, among all of those groups, disproportionately represented within police interactions, in our court system, and in our prisons. We also see similar disparities manifesting themselves on issues of employment, in health outcomes, in education, and in access to mental health services, and a wide variety of things. And it highlights for us that there is significant issues of disparity that are systemic within number of systems. Now, with respect to the criminal justice system, those disparities are obvious, and we have been working on that. There's a number of things the Justice Minister has done and is bringing forward now to try to address some of those disparities in our prison system and in our courts.
Merci.
And the Commissioner, through the RCMP, has also been undertaking to reduce those disparities and those disparate outcomes.
Merci, Monsieur le Ministre.
Thank you, Minister. And we're looking at a study here. We're starting our study on systemic racism. I mean, I don't know if you've got the latest facts, but there was a report that was submitted by your government in February 2018. It was a 127-page study, and it was acting against religious discrimination and systemic racism. And recommendation 28 of that report mentions recommendations regarding the RCMP in cooperation with the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police, put in place a training program for racial and cultural sensitivity training and other types of training destined specifically for law enforcement officers. So that's just over 2 years now that there's been a recommendation in a report tabled by your government. And there was also a study that's for the study of systemic racism, a 127-page report. Do you know about that?
Well, first of all, I mentioned in my opening remarks that we have actually funded through Public Safety Canada and the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police 4 distinct studies looking at systemic racism and policing in Indigenous communities, and those reports, as I've indicated, have been completed and will be made public. I might just turn quickly to the Commissioner to talk about training with respect to anti-discrimination measures. Commissioner?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Since I've been in the chair, we've actually introduced, first and foremost, the blanket exercise to cadets at depot, which gives them the history of Indigenous cultures and provides that the impacts of their actions, so that when they go out in the field, they can know what their impact is of their actions. We've have an online cultural awareness course. We also have introduced culture and humility course. We've brought in trauma-informed approaches to dealing with victims, as well as in the cadet training program, we've specifically brought in a missing persons module that, under the advice of Indigenous leaders, to make the victim actually Indigenous, so that they would not only work with dealing with an actual operational file, but knowing the culture associated with a missing Indigenous woman. Those are some of the training that we've introduced.
Thank you. Mr. Paulus, I think you want a point of clarification on the report.
Oui, merci. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to clarify, the report I mentioned is the report by the Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage that was tabled by the government in 2018.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you both for being here today, and I think we all need to recognize that while many of these events have come to light in the last few weeks, this has been an issue that's been ongoing, certainly with Indigenous people, for hundreds of years, and it's sadly. The systemic racism in policing against Indigenous peoples and Black Canadians and other racialized people in Canada is just unacceptable. So I'm glad we're having these conversations right now. I have some questions to start with around the Civilian Complaints and Review Commission. And Minister, I'm going to start with you. I'm going to give you a list of some things that I think could be looked at, and I'm wondering if you could maybe let me know if they're on your radar and you would consider doing them. One of them is bringing in legislation that would have timelines on the reports being released, an appeals process, whether the report could go to an advisory committee or another body rather than the RCMP reporting to itself. meaningful engagement of Indigenous and marginalized peoples in the review process, and simplifying the complaints process, because many people feel that they need to hire a lawyer and able to file a complaint. And there's numbers of people who do not have the socioeconomic ability to hire a lawyer. So it's simplifying the complaints process. So, Minister, I'm wondering if you could maybe let us know if that would be on your radar right now.
Let me begin by saying that I think our complaint system has to be accessible to all Canadians, and it needs to be transparent, it needs to be fair and objective, and it also needs to be quick. And what we have seen, and I've heard very clearly, a number of concerns that have been raised by Canadians across the country with the timeliness of those complaint reviews. I have actually a little bit of experience in my own jurisdiction under a different legislative framework with a complaint process. And I can tell you as a police chief, a well-functioning and accessible complaints review system that the public can trust in its objectivity, in its fairness, in its accessibility, and that individuals who engage in misconduct will be held to account is a tremendously important assistance to a police chief to maintain public trust in those complaint systems. And, you know, I also recall when they were first being introduced across the country, there was some resistance to it among police leaders. But what we found very quickly is when those investigations were being conducted independent of the police leadership and that the public trusted the outcome, it produced much better results. I'll also tell you that in my experience, the overwhelming majority of complaints can be resolved quite informally and quite quickly, but they need to be recorded and so to ensure the integrity of a complaints review system. I am in complete agreement with the importance of published and enforceable timelines so that Canadians can have a reasonable expectation of when that matter will be resolved. I think the more open and transparent is possible. The Commissioner and I have had a number of conversations about how that can be achieved. I would also point out that, you know, we introduced legislation in the last Parliament, which unfortunately it passed the House but didn't get through the Senate, and we've reintroduced it in the form of Bill C-3, and that's a complaint review system that builds upon the existing CRCC body and includes the responsibilities for providing a complaint mechanism for our border services officers. I'm looking very carefully at that legislation to ensure that it does have those appropriate and defined timelines, and so I think there are a number of things that this committee could do. Let me assure you that I'm very open to your observations and recommendations coming forward from the work of this committee on how we can make the complaint review system work better, not just for all Canadians, but for police officers who are the subject of these complaints, because a timely resolution of that complaint is actually in their interest as well, so that they can get on with rebuilding their relationship with the people they're supposed to be serving.
Thank you, Minister. And Commissioner, I have a specific question for you. In February, I held a screening of the movie We Will Stand Up, which was about what happened to Colton Boushie. His sister, his mom, and the director, Tanya Hubbard, were there. And obviously, there were a number of questions that were raised on racism in the legal system and within the RCMP. So there was a complaint filed, and I know that the review has been completed. And you've had it since January 2020, and I'm just wondering, on behalf of the family, when can they expect to see the results of that review?
I can't emphasize the importance of such a review. Is actually us who asked the CRC to do the review and not the reverse, and it was only because we wanted to be as transparent as we could. The CRC has done an extensive research and a great job on the review, and we need to give the same consideration to the review. I'm planning to have that review done by fall of this year.
Okay. Just quickly, because I only have 30 seconds left. Minister, in Regina is the First Nations University, and I'm wondering if you would consider, rather than just segments of training, having the cadets at Depot take an actual course in Indigenous history at First Nations University.
I could probably speak to that because we've talked about it, actually having that partnership. And actually, I've created a lived Indigenous advisory group with retired and current members of the RCMP. And one of their suggestions was that maybe people could take the course actually before they come into the academy. And that would be a great partnership. So your voice is well heard.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Madame Dano. Madame Michaud, 6 minutes.
Ms. Michaud, 6 minutes, please. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, before starting, I want to state that I'm so glad that the committee was able to convene so quickly to review this issue that is so important. The Bloc Québécois was one of the first to support this initiative by the NDP. We really have to review this issue of police brutality and systemic racism within the RCMP. Commissioner and Minister of Public Safety, I'd like to thank you both for being here today. We absolutely need to listen and hear victims, any victims, and all victims of police discrimination. These men and women are the ones who have the most to teach us as parliamentarians so that we can find specific, concrete solutions that are nonpartisan within this committee. So I'm very pleased to start on this process that starts today. Minister, thank you again for being here today. You spoke about solutions, concrete solutions, or some measures that have been put in place since you have been appointed to your position and since the Liberals have come into power. You talked about body cameras. I'd like to hear what the specific measures have been since the beginning of your government. I think everybody here agrees that discrimination does occur on a systemic level in the RCMP. The Commissioner recognizes it, you recognize it, the Prime Minister recognizes it. Now it's time to find solution-specific activities. So what are they?
Yeah, let me speak to a couple of things that I think are very important. One of the things that was recognized prior to the recent incidents and was placed right in my mandate letter from the Prime Minister was to work to co-produce with Indigenous leadership in Canada a new legislative framework for Indigenous policing. And for 35 years, Indigenous policing and policing in Indigenous communities and in the territories has been done primarily as a program. And it's the First Nations Policing Program, it's called. And it received program funding every year, but it's never been acknowledged or recognized as an essential service. And I think that's to its detriment. It's also, I think, necessary and appropriate to work with Indigenous leadership to acknowledge and recognize their jurisdiction in governance, in oversight, and in accountability, to have them have the ability to define how they want their communities to be policed. And there are a number of models with various levels of success across the country. And so I think we can learn and build upon that, and we've been doing that work. But I have reached out to the regional chiefs of the AFN and to the national chief, but also grand chiefs from around the country. We're also looking at those communities that are currently being policed by their own First Nations policing program to look at how we can improve, through a legislative framework, the delivery of those police services, which may include the RCMP, it may include other provincial police services, such as the Sûreté de Québec and the Ontario Provincial Police, but really acknowledges and recognizing the Indigenous leadership in their communities and how they want to be policed. We believe there's an opportunity, a need and an opportunity to move forward on that as well. We have been investing in creating a more diverse and inclusive RCMP, and the Commissioner can share with you the work that is being done as well. I will tell you from my own experience, having people in policing who have the lived experiences of the people they serve, who know what it's like to face discrimination and disparity, who know what it's like to be a new immigrant family, who have that lived experience and bring it to the profession of policing, it makes policing more effective in those communities. And so as we work to create more diverse police services, I think that's an important step forward as well. There is no one thing to do. There are very many things to do. And the last thing I will also say in response to your inquiry, it's not just simply about the police. It's about the community in which the police work and the type of work that we have them do. And so it's also necessary to invest in communities, in kids, to support other aspects of those communities that reduce the need for police intervention And perhaps no greater challenge exists for the police in this country than dealing with people in crisis. And there's been a great deal of work done and much more that needs to be done in that regard.
Donc, merci. Je comprends que vous...
Thank you. I understand that you think recognizing existing Indigenous policing services, you are thinking of doing that, of recognizing these groups. That's good. But funding these services, do you think that's something that could be done?
I think funding is an important issue, and so I think there's a number of aspects. I think the most important thing is to put in an appropriate legislative framework that recognizes an essential service, creates a strong system of governance. In my experience, good policing requires good governance, and we have to make sure that that's in place. But in addition to that, we have to make sure that the people that are hired and trained, overseen, and held accountable for the delivery of those services have to be adequately resourced to do so. To getting that right means there must be important conversations, and that work has begun, but there's a great deal more to do in working with Indigenous leaderships across the country, but also provincial and territorial partners. Like all of us, all orders of government have a responsibility here, but for the first time, and I think most importantly, we need to include Indigenous leadership in that discussion.
J'aimerais savoir, Monsieur le Ministre...
Minister, I'd like to know, as Minister, how you define systemic racism, and as former head of police services, perhaps you witnessed racial profiling. So in light of that, how do you define systemic racism that may exist within the RCMP or police services?
Very difficult question. Very briefly, please.
First of all, racial profiling is the misconduct of an individual, but systemic racism speaks to a far broader issue. It speaks to all of the aspects of the system, the criminal justice system, for example, which begins in community with police interventions and activities in the courts and within our prison system and even through the parole system. It's a very broad thing. And I define this systemic racism is deficiencies in a system that give rise to different outcomes for different racial groups. And so when we see, for example, Indigenous people grossly overrepresented in our prison system, in our courts, and in police interactions, or young black men, or any other racialized group, that is strong evidence, first of all, of systemic racism. And the other evidence that I think cannot be ignored and must be given full consideration is the lived experience of Canadians of different racial backgrounds, racial minorities, or Indigenous people, who, in their experience, we have to acknowledge the truth of their lived experience. And if they've experienced racism within the entire criminal justice system, we have that compels us to act.
Thank you, Madame Michaud. I'll have to leave it there. Mr. Angus, 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister Blair. Thank you, Minister Lucky. It's an honor to be here. I'm going to say two things at the outset. Mr. Blair, you, like me, you're a talker, so I'm going to have to ask you to keep them a little shorter because I only have 6 minutes here and I don't want to be rude. And secondly, I want to acknowledge the late Wayne Russett of the RCMP, who I had the honor of negotiating some very tense standoffs with when I worked with the Indigenous communities. And Wayne understood policing as a social engagement, about de-escalation, about building trust. And we are here to ensure that all officers in all departments understand that role of the police officer is someone that can actually take on a very difficult, intense situation and de-escalate it is vital. So with that in mind, you know, I was interested, your comments, you said that systemic racism was deficiencies in the system that brings different outcomes to different people. To me, the deficiencies in the system is that 4.9% of Canadians are Indigenous, and yet they represent nearly 40% of the fatalities in the RCMP. The different outcomes is like life and death. These are numbers that are staggering. And Minister, you talked about young men being young black men being disproportionately involved in the system. You know, when you were chief of police, carding was one of your very strong tools. You were very strong about it in the city of Toronto, and it was heavily used. Given what you know now, my colleague Matthew Green had said, would you consider apologizing to say that was a mistake using those tactics? What do you say about the use of carding that happened on your watch?
I would clarify for you and Mr. Green actually what the policy was in Toronto. We worked very hard on reducing gun violence in the city and worked I've worked in racialized communities most of my adult life, and I know the importance of treating everyone with respect and with dignity and within the law. I strongly advocated for working within those communities and never supported the indiscriminate or arbitrary stopping of individuals that was based on anything but evidence and the law. And those were the rules, and we upheld those rules. I think that the disparate outcomes were something that we were aware of. I can cite countless examples of working within those racialized communities and training programs for the police to reduce it. And Mr. Angus, I said then, and as I say now, racial profiling and any action of the police which is based on bias is not only unacceptable and abhorrent, but it's contrary to law. It's contrary to the Human Rights Act and Section 15, and it's contrary to the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which is the highest law of the country.
That was what was pointed out about carding. The arbitrary stopping of young black men. So again, if we look at the numbers and what they tell us, 8.8% of Toronto's population is black, yet they made up 30% of physical confrontations with police that resulted in serious injury, 60% of deadly encounters, and 70% of fatal police shootings were young black men, mostly in the city of Toronto. So these are very serious issues. So I'm glad to hear that from you. I want to switch gears a little bit. Being that we understand that the government is not moving forward yet on the murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls because of COVID, but COVID hasn't stopped the domestic violence and the horrific mistreatment of Indigenous women. I refer you to what's going on in Nunavut, where we've got cases. I believe the Complaints Commission has over 30 cases of women being treated in horrific conditions. It's actually hard to read it out. The strip searches, the humiliating treatment, tying women naked to the chairs. That wouldn't happen to white women anywhere else, but in Nunavut, this seems to be a pattern, and yet we've had no investigation of it. So in light of the promises that were made on the murdered and missing, how is it that we can see such abusive treatment of women who are suffering sexual assault in Nunavut?
Those things shouldn't happen to any woman in Canada. There needs to be investigations and a clear line of accountability, and I'll certainly allow the commissioner to speak on behalf of her service, but I also believe that that's unacceptable to her and to the leadership of the RCMP.
We'll follow up in the next round. I'm very pleased to see you talking about the disparity faced by Indigenous police in what is being treated as a program. In the communities we represent in Treaty 9 with Anishinaabe Police, they do incredible work. We've had a hell of a time getting them radios, getting backup. One officer told me, I've slept in places that you wouldn't let a dog sleep in. Their underfunding has put their ability to serve people at risk. And so when I see the struggle that we have in Anishinaabe territory to get good policing, and then I see, for example, the RCMP has just bought 2 armored vehicles at a time when we're talking about de-escalating and demilitarizing, I have to ask, what kind of priority is that? That, you know, we're buying old gear from Iraq, that the RCMP can afford that, and we can't get backup radios to ensure police protection in isolated communities like Kingfisher Lake or Pakanjikum?
Well, your question, I think, highlights a flaw in the existing system where those Indigenous police services in Ontario that you cite are funded on a funding model where the federal government pays 52% of the salary and costs of policing, and the province pays 48%. That model of program funding has created, I think, very serious deficiencies in those police services. And by the way, I know the men and women who serve in those services and their leadership too. They're really great people, and they're doing their very best under very difficult and challenging circumstances. It's one of the things that motivates my government to go and create that new legislative framework to serve those communities better and to give them the type of well-resourced, appropriately resourced policing services that those communities deserve and need.
Leave it there. Mr. Morrison, 5 minutes, please.
I was trying to be quick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to start off with a brief comment. As a former member of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police for over 30 years, I've been fortunate that I've worked across Canada and internationally. I've worked with thousands of regular members, civilian members, public service support staff, municipal and provincial police agencies as well. The RCMP is a professional organization with outstanding employees. I am proud of my service and confident the RCMP policing in Canada. I want to recognize the members of the RCMP who live in our communities. Their children grow up in our communities. They coach high school sports, volunteer for many events, and I thank them for their service to Canadians, especially in tough times. Right now, though, the morale is low and the members are looking for some leadership from senior management and are not getting the support. We're here today to discuss racism in all departments of the federal government, specifically today with the RCMP senior management recognizing current issues and being accountable to take corrective action. I want to thank Minister Blair, Commissioner Lucki for being here today. Minister, the government has admitted there's systemic racism in every department of the federal government, including the RCMP. I note your mandate letter does not identify the priority of working to engage your departments with instructions to eliminate racism, although diversity was in the Commissioner's mandate letter. Mr. Minister, can you tell or explain why the Commanding Officer's Cultural Diversity Advisory Committee in British Columbia was dissolved?
And I don't have the answer to that question because I'm not familiar with it. Okay. But I could perhaps turn to the Commissioner if you want that question answered now.
This is news to me, but it possibly could be because when we brought in gender and gender committees, many of the people in the diversity committee and the gender and harassment committee, there was a meld of that because we created the gender and harassment committees, which included diversity. So they might have rebranded it.
And that is it's a bit disappointing, but I was fortunate to be the chair of the Commanding Officer's Cultural Diversity Advisory Committee a few years ago.
I will follow up.
And the importance of that committee to help bridge the gap between law enforcement and our diverse communities, listening to what the communities say, understanding their issues and concerns. As this committee, it reports direct to the commanding officers who in turn report to the commissioner, so there's some accountability there. I would strongly recommend the Public Safety Minister reintroduce the Commanding Officers Cultural Diversity Advisory Committee across Canada. This will ensure that the commanding officers who report to the commissioner will be accountable for taking action and not just lip service. Also introducing a similar committee across the public safety portfolio. Ensuring performance agreements of your senior management is reflective of this accountability. Mr. Minister, can we count on your support?
Well, I'm very interested in your proposal. I will tell you from my own experience, I actually had 17 different community advisory committees in my small police service. And of course, the challenge for the RCMP would be much larger being a national service. But I will acknowledge to you, I recognize the value of meeting with and working with diverse communities and engaging with them on a number of different levels. And I also did it at the command level because I found great value in that. It improved the quality of our interactions. And so I'm very open to that. I will tell you that we have created a number of different engagement mechanisms and structures with various diverse communities on a number of important issues that the public safety portfolio is undertaking. But I'm happy to look at the model that you recommend and discuss it with you further rather than take up your time this afternoon.
Okay, thank you. Minister, when your government appointed Commissioner Lucki, did you make addressing and eliminating systemic racism within the RCMP part of the mandate? And I'll just finish the question. If so, what specific issues did the government instruct the commissioner to act on?
Yeah, the commissioner's mandate is quite broad and deals with a number of issues of diversity and inclusion, but it did not speak specifically, in my recollection, to the issue of systemic racism more broadly. And I think that acknowledgement is an important place that we as a country have come to today in acknowledgement of systemic racism in so many aspects of our society. It certainly goes well beyond the criminal justice system, and I think when we look at all the challenging things that police, for example, deal with or our corrections deal with, it does compel us to look at systemic disparities in other aspects of our society. And so I think it is an important issue and one that we have been very frank with Canadians in acknowledging its existence, as has the Commissioner. And it clearly, as this committee recognizes, there's work to do.
Thank you, Mr. Morrison. I know that was a short 5 minutes, but 5 minutes it was. Madame Cara, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister and Commissioner, for being here. Minister, I know you've been very clear on this, even in your remarks and some of the questions that you've answered, but I just want to get it on record for my constituents, especially with your extensive experience in policing and as well as now as a Minister of Public Safety. Do you believe systemic racism exists in policing, especially in the RCMP?
Yeah, but if I may, thank you very much for the question, but if I may be very clear, I think it's an issue in Canadian society, and I think it's an issue in policing. The RCMP is the National Police Service and the police service that also delivers contract policing in many provinces across the country is included in that, but I'm not pointing out them exclusively. I think these are challenges within many aspects of our society. The police perform a very difficult and challenging role on behalf of all Canadians, and I think that systemic racism, as it impacts the delivery of policing service, is perhaps one of our greatest challenges, because we are dealing with people that often at their most vulnerable, and we have seen the disparate outcome and listen to the lived experience of so many diverse Canadians.
And in your view, Minister, where are the biggest gaps in addressing systemic racism in the RCMP?
Again, with respect to policing, I think it's essential, first of all, that and I mentioned this earlier, I think governance is very important, and I think good quality governance, where you enable a community to engage in oversight and through policy have input on the type of policing services that they want to see delivered. The greater systems of oversight and accountability and transparency are also critically important. Some of the most recent issues do highlight the need for continuous improvement in training, not just in cultural competency and the communities that police officers serve, but also in the way in which they do their job. And there's a report I would commend to you on police officers and how we deal with people in crisis in our society. I think it's an incredibly important issue, and it affects policing in every community, in every part of the country. And so there are a number of significant gaps that need to be addressed. But I think ultimately our police services, as I've acknowledged in my opening remarks, overwhelmingly good people doing their very best to do an incredibly difficult job. I think they need more help. And I think we need to be very clear on the type of policing we want and expect in Canada.
Thanks, Minister. Now, I just want to shift gears in terms of some of the training. Can you just provide us with an overview of what training or education a recruit would undergo to learn about the lived experiences of racialized Canadians? Is this training mandatory? Can you walk us through the whole training experience? And also, what training is available for those that are already established RCMP officers?
I'm going to begin by saying I think it's important to make sure that you're recruiting people that that come from diverse communities, that have the lived experience of the people that they're going to serve and protect. I think that's critically important, and so an inclusive recruitment and hiring policy is very important, and it goes beyond that, of course, because you want that diversity reflected throughout your entire organization. I think that's a very good place to start. At the very least, we want to make sure that we're recruiting police officers who are open and willing to learn about other cultures and other peoples, because I think that commitment to continuous learning is also very important. The Commissioner was the commanding officer at Depot and knows perhaps more than anyone that I can mention that would know what is done there, so I'll turn to her.
Thank you so much for your question. I did mention, first of all, the blanket exercise that we brought in. Actually, when I was the commanding officer, I attended the first one with the cadets. An elder comes in and leads that session. We do have a room specific that was there before, an Indigenous reflection room for members, as well as we have prayer rooms at Depot and various other spots for reflection of all cultures. We have the cultural awareness training. It's an extensive online training that is mandatory for every employee of the RCMP. We just introduced Culture and Humility, which is a new course. And when a member goes out to their division, each province has their own one-week Indigenous perceptions course specific to the province. So obviously a course in Nunavut would be much different than a course in Manitoba, and it brings in people who have lived experience with the residential school or the 60s scoop or any of the lived experience. Every module, when we talk about for instance, we talk about domestic violence, we have somebody who's had a lived experience who presents that. In the LGBTQ module, we have people who have that lived experience. So we always try to get people from the community in those modules to talk about that, so to reflect and understand the impact, so when they go out and deal with those people, that they have a better understanding of the impact of their actions on the history of what that person has lived through, and it's really important.
We're going to have to, unfortunately, leave that answer there, Ms. Kamel. Ms. Kara. Ms. Vecchio, 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, and thank you for coming today, Minister Blair and Commissioner. It's wonderful to have you. Just starting looking at some things that are recurring. There's currently a $600 million class action lawsuit against the RCMP, specifically on regarding Indigenous people in the North. Can you share a little bit about that and share with me how many other lawsuits have there been, and have there been mostly settled out of court? Do you have some information on that so that we can look at that?
I don't have that information in front of me. That particular lawsuit is very new in the sense that I don't even believe it's been certified yet.
Okay, Minister Blair, are you familiar with any information on that regarding the lawsuit?
No, I'm not familiar with that one until it's certified, and quite frankly, we don't normally comment on something that's before the courts until it's resolved, but we track them very carefully, of course, and we don't wait until the outcome of those lawsuits to do our best to respond. And for example, during the Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women's Inquiry, the RCMP implemented a number of different training initiatives while that inquiry was ongoing in an effort to respond quickly.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And Minister, we know that you have been the police chief for 10 years in Canada's largest city. During that time, what were some of the steps that you took to address racism and the eliminate systemic racism in the Toronto Police Services?
Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate that question very much. One of the very first things I did on the very first day I was appointed to police chief, I was asked if racial profiling exists, and I acknowledged that it did. And apparently I was the first in the country to do that. But I honestly believe that if you don't acknowledge its existence, how can you do anything about it? And so we immediately undertook, for example, I wanted to create a diverse police service. Toronto's the most diverse city in the world. And so I put in a policy that half of all the people that we would recruit into the police service would be from diverse communities and or female. And we never once went below 54%. We initiated extensive anti-bias training programs, diversity training programs, also developed in a number of areas. We looked at all the positions in our organization that led to promotion and people ascending into leadership positions in the organization. And we made sure that diverse people had full access, diverse people within our organization had full access to those training opportunities, those experiences that would enable them to be successful in our promotion systems. When I left the Toronto Police Service after 10 years, half of my command was diverse and half of my command was female.
Fantastic. Now, so would you say with that diversity that you had put on the Toronto Police Services, did you find racism was eliminated, reduced? What do you think that your actual results were during your time?
Well, Karen, I would acknowledge, first of all, we recruit from the human race, and racism and bias are human failings. And so I would not presume to tell you that we eliminated it, but we created, I think, a very strong culture within the Toronto Police Service of respect for the diversity of our city, of inclusiveness. We created, I think, very strong examples of leadership and within the community. We worked tirelessly in in diverse communities. We did a lot of outreach. As I mentioned earlier, we had consultative committees with all of the diverse communities who helped us with recruiting, helped us with our policies, helped us with our training. And so I think we made significant progress, and I would never suggest to you the job was done.
Have you seen that it has gotten worse? What would you say, if we're comparing 2020 to 2010, what have you seen some of these changes in one of our greatest and diverse cities in Canada and around the world?
What we have seen is the emergence of far more diverse leadership within policing, not just in Toronto, by the way, but across the country. And I think that's reflected in many ways. We've seen a significantly increased and changing role of women in policing, for example, but also people who've lived in diverse communities. I will tell you, in my experience, when I put people around my command table who knew what it was like to be an immigrant, who knew what it was like to live with disparity, and when I asked them for their feedback on important decisions that we had to make about policing the city of Toronto, the benefit of that diversity of perspectives enabled us to provide much better services to the people of a diverse city.
You mentioned you had 17 different groups that you worked with, or 17 individuals that you worked with as part of your policy building, I believe, as well.
Yeah, it wasn't individuals, ma'am. It was representative of different community and cultural groups within the city.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Angono, 5 minutes.
Your mandate letter underscores that one of your priorities is to ensure that all employees be responsible for safety and that law be enforced and have access to training on biases and cultural competencies. Can you give us an update on this training on unconscious biases?
There are programs that are available both in policing and within the public service, but I will acknowledge to you that there is a great deal more work to be done to make sure that that training is accessible to all of our employees.
Minister, systemic racism needs to be addressed not only in the RCMP itself, but also in its operations and in our communities across the country. In this system, an enormous gap exists between the actors on each side. No communication and no mediation seems to be able to fill the gap. At this point, we need bold changes. How do you plan on rebooting the system on a parallel way at the RCMP level and also at the community level to fill in the gaps and thus have a more harmonious environment?
First of all, I try not to be too discouraged because I've seen some extraordinary examples right across this country. I've been speaking to Indigenous leadership and people in communities right across the country who've shared with me extraordinary stories of the relationship between them and the police officers that they serve. I was speaking to the National Chief the other day, and we were talking about policing when he shared with me that 3 of his brothers served in the RCMP. I was speaking to one of the regional chiefs in the Northwest Territories who talked to me about special constables and community safety officers and the extraordinary relationship that was built between the RCMP and people in his community. There's some extraordinary examples in the Yukon and in places right across Canada. And so I think building upon that extraordinary work and the relationships that have been built, that's not to suggest for a moment that the situation does not require a lot of work or that it's perfect. But there's a great deal to be encouraged from because we have good people working in good communities and doing some extraordinary work. We just need to make sure that they're properly supported, and that's not just supported by money and people and resources and equipment. We're talking about having strong governance structures, strong systems of accountability and transparency, so that there's nothing more important in a relationship between the police and the people they serve than to be trusted. And to be trusted, you have to be trustworthy. And trustworthy has a number of really important elements, and that includes accountability and transparency. And people need to demonstrate their commitment to service and the protection of the people they're sworn to serve. There are some great examples of that. There are some places where we need to improve.
And do we have a plan of action to take these examples that you are referring to and to reprogram the system and influence a better interaction between the RCMP and the communities. You mentioned earlier that programs of diversion and inclusions already exist. Are they appropriate? Are they up to date? Do they take into consideration what Canada is today with its different cultural communities and requests and expectations?
And I can say absolutely unequivocally, some of them are great, but they're not good enough. There's more work to be done. And we all acknowledge that there's a great deal more to be done. I've already indicated, I think one of the things that we're working very hard on within my ministry, I've already reached out to Indigenous leadership across the country. We've had a number of I think, very important and positive discussions about creating a new legislative framework for Indigenous policing across the country, to make it an essential service. And it's not something we're just going to develop here in Ottawa and impose upon those communities across the country. It's going to be co-produced. We're working with Indigenous leadership, and we are also having important conversations with those communities that have had some very strong histories and examples of good policing in their communities, to build on those examples, but also make sure that we address a history which is not as positive in other places, so that we earn back the trust that is necessary to police those communities.
Thank you, Mr. Ancono. Normally I would end it here, but there's still 2.5 minutes to the block and 2.5 minutes to the NDP, which I'd ask that they pursue, and then we will suspend for a few minutes, 1 minute, in order to be able to allow the minister to leave, and then we'll continue on. So, with that, Madame Michaud.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There's certainly a certain number of elements that explain the discrimination that people experience when they're from certain communities. And on the website of the Civilian Reviews, Complaints and Commission for the RCMP, we can see that the form is available in 16 languages, and we can see that language can be a problem. Of the 16 languages, only 13 are Indigenous. So why is this form not available in all Indigenous languages? How could somebody who's Indigenous, who suffers abuse or discrimination from the part of the police, provide a complaint if they can't have access to the form in their language?
We spoke earlier about the importance of accessibility of a complaints resolution system. Every Canadian has to have the ability to bring forward a complaint without the help of a lawyer and in a language that makes it accessible to them. The RCMP, I know, has worked hard, as has the CRCC, to make that as accessible as possible. You mentioned translated it into a number of Indigenous languages. If there's more work to be done, that will be part of the work that we have in front of us.
Monsieur le ministre, le rapport...
Minister, the 2018-2019 annual report of the Civilian Review Complaints Commission has noted that there was a 30% increase in the number of complaints up from the previous year. We saw all kinds of things, abusive use of force, and so many other things. And you talked about measures put in place over the past number of years. How can the number of complaints continue to increase in that case?
It's always possible to look at the number of complaints and an increase in the number of complaints as indicative of a growing problem. It also, I hope, also indicates a growing awareness and trust in the complaints resolution system. A greater concern to me would be no complaints at all, because we know that interactions between the police and the public do not always go perfectly, and people may be quite unsatisfied with the service or the outcome. And so making sure that a complaint system is available and accessible to Canadians, that it provides them with a timely resolution of their complaint is the right thing to do for the public and for the police officer. And of course, I know the Commissioner tracks very carefully when there is a pattern of increasing complaints of a certain nature, that is quickly responded to and evaluated with respect to their training, their policies, and their systems of accountability.
Thank you, Madame Michaud. Mr. Angus and Mr. Blair, 2.5 minutes for two talkers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, one concern when we're talking about taking seriously the issue of systemic racism in Canada is the federal government always has a policy. It doesn't collect race-based data because it says, well, we're not a racist state and everybody's the same. And we know from having that we have this meeting that everybody's not treated the same. Incidences of violence against Indigenous people is much higher. Incidences of targeting racialized and Black communities are much higher. Would you make a simple recommendation to say that the RCMP needs to collect race-based data so we actually can start getting better pictures of how the force is being used?
Yes, sir. I will tell you that, again, in my experience, about 30 years ago, the police used race-based data inappropriately. And it had the very negative effect of stigmatizing, people and Canadians, and it was therefore prohibited in Toronto for a number of years.
So I just want to jump in there because they only have so how do we do it? How do we balance it so that what we're gathering is actually about accountability?
I think the collection of and the availability of race-based data, we need that information so that we can make decisions on where we need to make investments in communities, investments in kids, changes in the criminal justice system. That data is invaluable and necessary, but I always place a caution on it that we also need to be careful that it's not misused for a purpose that we do not intend. The information, I very strongly support the collection of disaggregated race-based data to help inform the important decisions that we have to make to support those communities and help those kids.
Sure.
Yes, as the minister said before, when we took that data, it was to be bias-free. They said you couldn't collect that data. Now we're looking at it and we're saying to be more effective and to bring on the change that's needed to combat the racism, we may have to look at starting to collect that data so that we can define the racial disparities and how they exist and how to address it. We will work, my commitment is to work with the Privacy Commissioner on that.
You will work with the Privacy Commissioner?
Yes, absolutely.
Mr. Angus, we're going to have to leave it there. I want to thank the minister for his attendance here. I'm going to suspend for 30 seconds because I think the minister can exit the room without any assistance.
Thank you, Mr.
whatsoever. Thank you. Yeah. this committee meeting. And as we can see on our monitors, there is a third person virtually present. I want to thank the Commissioner for being here. And I, with or without the permission of the committee, I'm going to run a little bit late, only because it took some time to do some transferring. But I think this is important. Everybody's made a lot of effort to be here, and I know they do want to direct a lot of questions to you. With that, I'll ask the Commissioner for her opening statement and to introduce the people that are with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To my right, I have Assistant Commissioner Dennis Daly, who is in our contract and Indigenous policing, and on the screen is our fairly new, well, probably 8 months, Chief Human Resource Officer Gail Johnson. Good evening. Je vous remercie de m'avoir invité.
I'd like to thank you for inviting me to discuss these crucial issues.
Speaking on the unceded Algonquin territory. The last several weeks have been extremely difficult for Canadians, for Indigenous, Black, and racialized communities, as well as for police. This has sparked an important conversation across the country, and I have been listening, and the calls for action have been heard. My opening remarks outline RCMP modernization efforts in the wake of these recent events. When I was appointed Commissioner 2 years ago, I said I plan to challenge the assumptions, seek the explanations, and better understand the reasons how we operate. This means that no stone will be left unturned. Les deux dernières semaines ont...
The past 2 weeks have strengthened our resolve and given us the opportunity to intensify our efforts.
To advance change and step up our actions to serve, protect, and reflect all communities, achieve reconciliation with Indigenous and racialized communities, and bolster relationships built on recognition of rights, respect, mutual trust, cooperation, and partnership. We are not a perfect organization, but we will continue to learn, grow, and evolve. As I expressed directly to my members in a video message several days ago, it's painful to hear. Nevertheless, a constructive dialogue is important if we are to strengthen the trust of Canadians. There's also a deep pain in Canada's Indigenous, Black, and racialized communities, including those in the RCMP who have suffered the inequities of systemic racism. And I would like to affirm here before Parliament that I am so very proud to lead the 30,000 employees of the RCMP who continue to have my deep appreciation for what they do every single day, serving Canadians with dedication and professionalism. And they do this out of an intense sense of fairness and a desire to protect the vulnerable in every corner of Canada and around the world. Let me say that we are committed to seek out and eliminate all forms of racism and discrimination in our organization. I have listened to RCMP employees and their families who are demoralized by the anti-police narrative that is painting everyone unfairly with the same brush. But acknowledging that systemic racism is present in the force does not equate to employees being racist. It is about how an organization creates and maintains racial inequality, often caused by sometimes subtle and unintentional biases in police policies, practices, and process that either privilege or disadvantage different groups of people. I have heard from and reached out to many people, listening, learning, and reflecting on how these discussions translate into strengthening my organization. I have spoken with Indigenous leaders, including Senator Murray Sinclair, who spoke to me about taking a closer look at our recruitment and our training. I also spoke to MMIWG Commissioner Marion Buller, who spoke to me about our ongoing commitment to work with and learn from communities that will help us make real progress. I listened to Indigenous employees, both current and retired, who reminded me of the importance of our roots in community policing and the importance of the connection to the people we serve. Maintenant que je fais le GRC pour renforcer cette confiance.
Now, I want to strengthen this trust and counter systemic racism. I want to talk to you about what we have done to date.
A clear mandate to modernize and transform our culture. In just over 2 years, we have made significant progress. I have received input both internally and externally from my National Council of Diversity and Inclusion, my Indigenous Advisory Committee, community leaders, particularly those in Black and Indigenous communities. I have established a new Indigenous lived experience advisory group comprised of current and former Indigenous RCMP employees. Nous appliquons une lentille de diversité.
We are applying a diversity and inclusion lens to our policies, our program, our recruitment, our training, and our processes to better understand some of the unintended barriers that exist and to work to correct them.
Gender-based leadership is being integrated into our recruitment, our training, and our promotion process. We have added more learning about Indigenous history for cadets and incorporated Indigenous traditions into RCMP traditions through a number of ways, including supporting Indigenous employees wearing traditional items like the eagle feather and the Métis sash when donning our red serge. We have updated national programs, including strengthened cultural awareness training and training in unconscious bias and trauma-informed approaches. And we have enhanced RCMP's participation in restorative justice initiatives across the country. In terms of doing more to address systemic racism going forward, we are reprioritizing and enhancing our action plan to make changes at all levels, from recruiting to training to reporting and to accountability. We really need to double down on hiring a more diverse membership, as we would like greater diversity to reflect the communities where we serve. We are working to ensure that no unintended bias exists in our recruiting or training that could inadvertently and inappropriately impact some segments of our society.
We are revisiting our relocation practices and looking at place-based recruitment so that officers remain in the communities where ties and roots are already established.
Continue to examining our policing models and really looking at solutions with the communities we serve that are community-focused and community-driven. The RCMP was built on community policing, and we respond to an average of 2 million calls for service each year. Less than 1% of those calls involve use of force. Over 99% of incidents are resolved with our presence, our communication, and de-escalation, and not the use of force. For those few incidents where force is used, our training and our protocols provide clear direction on using minimum amount of force, and we rely on de-escalation and crisis intervention when necessary. When it comes to holding employees to account, we have extensive operational policies designed to ensure transparency, accountability, and openness. Policing is a profession that has a broad range of accountability mechanisms. There is oversight in the courts, as well as independent inquiries, commissions, inquests, and reviews. We are completely dedicated to making this great organization better than what it was when we started. Nous sommes, mon équipe et moi, déterminés.
My team and I are determined to accomplish this work and are making progresses. However, modernization is an ongoing process.
Is to be the most respected and the most trusted police service in the world, grounded in solid relationships with all Canadians, and particularly our Indigenous, Black, and racialized communities. We need to broaden the space for these difficult discussions and build on ones already underway. It is an opportunity for real change and leadership, and we are committed to do just that. Thank you. Je vous remercie de m'avoir donné l'occasion.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak with you today.
Forward to your discussions and dialogue.
Thank you, Commissioner Lucky. Probably we should have the sign changed in front of her, since probably she doesn't really want to be Bill Blair. Mr. Uppal, 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, and thank you, Commissioner, for being here for this important study. you know, as Canadians, I know around the table everywhere, we would all agree that there's so much we are so proud of being Canadian and proud of our history and proud of what Canada is. But of course, there's issues that we need to work on, and racism is one of them in Canada, both racist incidences, but also systemic. And I believe, you know, and we've all acknowledged that they exist in our public institutions and in private institutions as well. And so this is a very important conversation, important opportunity to study this issue for legislators to take a look at how do we move forward. And as a parent, this is a conversation about racism is one that I've you know, myself and my wife, we have with our kids, because it's racism is not something we can completely shield them from. So it's something that we feel that they need to maybe understand, maybe prepare them, you know, as they grow older. And of course, conversations change. But it's important. So the work that we're doing today is working to make the system better, going into the future and better for them. And so just wanted to ask you, let me just start off with the makeup of the RCMP, the demographics of it. Do you have any statistics, kind of in terms of members with either cultural backgrounds, indigenous, ethnic background? Do you know what the percentage is of overall of the RCMP? Is that data that you keep? And maybe if you do, which is important for recruitment, where was that 5 years ago and where are you now?
Yes, we do keep those statistics, and thank you for that question. The statistics are based, though, I must put a caveat, on self-identification. So if somebody doesn't self-identify, we don't have those statistics. But right now in the RCMP, when we talk about the sworn police officer, we have 78% are male, 21% are female. There's 11.5 visible minority and 7.5 Aboriginal, and 1.6% with people with disabilities. I don't have it as of 5 years ago, but what I do know from our charts that both female visible minorities are on the rise, as well as Indigenous, but in the last year or so, Indigenous has plateaued, but the other two are still rising.
Thank you. And so that's a makeup of all of it. How does that look like in the management ranks?
Well, you know what? I have to say, I have during my time as commissioner, that has been a huge priority for me. When I arrived, we have 15 commanding officers of each province or division, and I can say that there was one, for example, one female commanding officer. Now 7 of the 15 are female. In our senior executive committee, because when I talk about diversity, I talk also about the category of employee for us, because that brings diverse ideas and thoughts. We had, at one point, all senior executives were police officers. And now we have Gail Johnson, who is our Chief Human Resource Officer. Our Chief Informatics Officer is female. Our new CFO, who started on Monday, is female. We have myself, the commissioner, of course, and those 3 people that I mentioned are all civilian employees. And for the first time ever, we have a chief administrative officer who is also civilian. So there's actually more civilians on our senior executive than police officers. You talked about, sorry, your other question was?
No, it's fine. I'm just going to actually go on to another statistics. Do you have statistics on the number of police interactions in Canada versus, so interactions versus those that result in complaints? Just trying to get a sense of the scope of that problem.
Well, what I
So now, I know you mentioned use of force,
yeah,
but this wouldn't be just specifically use of force, but overall complaints.
The complaints actually, it was surprising when I heard the statistics, because we get on average about 2,250, 2,300 complaints a year, and it actually has gone down. 2018-19 was 2,317, and this year is our 1920 is 2286. But just to give you some context of all of those complaints, because when you make the complaint, the CRC gives the RCMP ask them to investigate it in the first instance. And of those complaints, 75% of those complaints, the complainant is satisfied with the disposition that has come about in that complaint. At the very end of the disposition says if you are not satisfied. So when we talk about, somebody mentioned about an appeal process, I think it was in that complaint system, the CRCC is actually that appeal process, because 25% of those go to the CRC. And of those 25%, 75% of the time the CRC is happy with our disposition. So it's really 25% of 25% that is the part that we don't that is not in agreement, but we do agree with 75% of the recommendations from the CRCC.
Thank you, Mr. Uppal.
Those were a lot of numbers, sorry.
Mr. Anand Sangari, my second fellow Scarborough Caucus member.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to start by acknowledging that we're all gathered here on the traditional lands of unceded lands of the Algonquin people. Madam Commissioner, I was one of many people who were very excited upon your appointment 2 years ago. The last several weeks have been very difficult, and very difficult for racialized people. There are many names, starting with George Floyd and many others in Canada, that I can name and outline the tragedies that have taken place at the hands of the police. What is very disappointing was your lack of clarity in acknowledging that systemic racism existed when the question was posed to you. And equally troubling was the failure of your deputy commissioner in Alberta. And I think what's difficult, I think, for me today is to understand whether the RCMP and you and your office and your team understand the urgency that is before us. This is the moment in history where the world is moving. I have seen people who've demonstrated on the streets who've never gone out before, who were complacent and who thought that, even if they were affected by racism, they would not speak because they were afraid of the repercussions. And I've seen so many people, especially young people, who've been on the streets who are demanding action. How do you respond to this urgency? Because at this point, there is, it's not the training, it's not, all of those are important, recruitment training, all of those are important, those will take time. But how do you respond in order to gain the confidence of the public, particularly racialized people, notably Indigenous and Black people?
Thank you for your question. This is a moment in time that is if it isn't a wake-up call, then shame on everybody, including the RCMP. And my intention was not to, when I said I struggled with the definition of systemic racism, it wasn't an unacknowledgement of it. It was trying, when we look at the systems and processes in place, when I became commissioner, the first thing I did was bring in a gender-based analysis plus expert. That person sits at our senior executive table for every decision we make so that they can put that lens on every decision we make, and it's made a huge difference in our decision making. But I have widened my lens and had a better sort of changing my perspective in the sense that there is systemic racism in the RCMP. I had a long talk with Deputy Commissioner Zablocki, who, again, didn't want to paint all the members with the same brush. But when we had a discussion, and I have to say, Gail Johnson, who's on the screen, I asked her to share her personal lived experience with our senior executive group and our senior management team across the country so that we could get a better understanding and so that we wouldn't have our own perspective on something that we may or may not have lived.
Commissioner, if I may just ask you, there's a lot of talk about reimagining policing. Some are calling it defunding. Many are suggesting with the number of incidents involving mental health issues, people with mental health challenges. How do you reimagine police? How do you reimagine the RCMP to be a service of the future, a service that can actually serve all Canadians?
When I think of the defunding, I think more about funding all social services. Having policed in the North myself, when you, in many communities, there is no addictions counseling, there is no mental health crisis centers. So in those times of crisis, we are the first response. And even if there was those services in those areas, it's so important that the first response, when a person is in crisis, and I have said at 3 o'clock in the morning when somebody's wielding a knife and they're suffering from a mental health crisis, that is not the time to bring in mental health practitioners. It's time for the RCMP to go in, get that person calm, get them to a place of safety, and get them the help they need. Often it's not in the community, so we actually will physically escort them on the plane and bring them to a place where they can get the help they need. So it's not about defunding, it's about funding everything that goes along. And I think we can work better with our mental health practitioners. We have a model, for example, in Grand Prairie, Alberta, I'm familiar with because I was in charge of that district, where a mental health practitioner was on the mental health de-escalation team in Grand Prairie. And so they would attend the call, stay in a safe location, but as soon as it was safe, that person was in. So we have to look at those various different models and not be stuck in a traditional response mode.
Thank you, Madam Commissioner. I don't think I have time for another question, but one thing that I do want to get on the record is the issue of mental health, because we've seen a number of fatalities that have resulted, tragically, because police were responding to either wellness checks or other forms where there was someone with a mental health challenge on the other side, and it hasn't gone well. So we definitely do need to reimagine policing, not just in the sense of looking at funding other programs, but also to change policing the way as it currently exists.
Thank you, Mr. Anand-Sangri. Madame Michaud, 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
6 minutes, please. Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Madam Commissioner, for your presence in a statement on June 12th, and I quote, "During our history, we didn't always treat Indigenous and racialized people in a fair manner, and still the case today." You also stated that you recognize that there was systemic racism within the RCMP. However, the first time you were asked the question, you hesitated. What made you hesitate and change your mind afterwards?
I don't call it changing my mind. I call, when I talked about systemic racism, I kept thinking of all the things. I wasn't looking at it from a historical point of view. I was looking at it through today's lens and thinking about all the things that we have done to eliminate it and still the work to be done. And I looked at it from a different perspective, in the sense that there are things in our recruiting process, in our hiring processes, that exclude certain people. I can give examples, and I wasn't. It wasn't that I was devouring it. I was just not. I was struggling with the definition at that point, because at that point I'd heard many different ones, and when I put it to policing, I was looking at it through a different lens than what I'd seen. But I would never say that there's no systemic racism, and for that I apologize.
Merci. Thank you. You also said that police officers at the federal level that do not respect substantial values of the RCMP should be perhaps turned away. And the way it was said is as if we were finally opening our eyes on certain behaviors. What is the accountability that these officers will have to show for when we look at abusive behavior?
RCMP member who does not live up to our core values will be held to account. Point. Final. No question. And we have obviously a range of disciplinary measures from operational guidance to dismissal. We need to look at that we are hiring the right person. We are training them properly to be empathetic and to be compassionate, to live to our core values. We are introducing character-based recruitment so that we can ensure that we get the right person. But it's not just about that, because you might get the right person, but you might not, if your training is all for naught, that's not going to help. So it's got to be from the time they start to the time they retire. We've brought in Foundations of Leadership. It's a pilot project that was brought in at the end of last year, beginning of this year. There's several modules. One includes unconscious bias, racism, conflict management, having difficult conversations, because we can have great employees, but if they are not properly supervised or properly led, that's yet another issue. So it has to be from all angles, and it's something that we need to work on and get better at, but we are definitely putting the GBA Plus lens on our recruitment. We did a full GBA Plus analysis on our recruitment, and we are actually now starting a GBA Plus analysis on our entire cadet training program.
The Prime Minister also stated that the changes that you started to put into place at the RCMP is doing making quite the difference to counter racism at the RCMP. What are these measures that have been put into place, and what are the measures that will be put into place in the next weeks and the next months?
When I got into the chair as commissioner, I introduced what I call Vision 150, and that's our road to the 150th anniversary in 2023. In there, it was based on, the focus was on people within the RCMP and the community. And the premise was, if we focus on our people, we'll have better operations and a safer Canada. And under that, we put 4 pillars: our people, our culture, our stewardship, and our policing services. And there are initiatives under each one of those pillars. And all of it is so that we can make our culture more tolerant, more inclusive, more diverse, so that we can be reflective of the communities that we serve. They need training. They need to make sure that that how do we get rid of their unconscious bias, or sometimes conscious bias when they are policing? That's the most difficult part of policing, because when you are policing groups of people and with the same type of incidents, it's very easy to get an unconscious bias. How do we get people to recognize that, acknowledge it, and be more empathetic? So bringing in, for instance, the blanket exercise to the training academy is one such area. The Culture and Humility Corps is very, very powerful. Bringing in trauma-informed approach to dealing with victims, so that, and that was part of our missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls actions. We have quite a few actions underneath that. So when we speak about we established a National Office of Investigative Standards and Practices so that those investigations will be dealt with the same way, regardless of what person or what individual is the victim or what individual is the criminal. We need to get better at our restorative justice referrals so that we eliminate people getting into the justice system, especially as a youth. Pre-charge restorative justice, we need to get better at the referrals.
Unfortunately, we'll have to leave it there, Madame Michaud. Mr. Angus, 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Commissioner. This past weekend, 400 people in my little town marched for Black Lives Matter. This is a transformative moment. And I have to be able to look at them and say, you can trust that your voice is being heard around the world, that change will happen. And for you, to your officers, you need to be able to tell them the morale of the force will be strong when we deal with issues that are completely unacceptable in a transparent manner. So it really comes to the moving beyond the good words to actually clear actions that we can point to. So I want to ask you just a few questions on that, because when an incident occurs, we need to know that the process in place can deal with it, and whatever the result of that is, we can hold it up and say this was the investigation. So I did meet with the Colton Boushie family, and I learned a lot. I learned about the trauma the mother suffered, where she was basically treated like an accomplice when her son was dead, that the evidence and the body of the boy was left out in the rain for 24 hours, which made the case, it wrecked the case. That there were RCMP on a Facebook group saying Colton Boushie got what was coming to him. These were the allegations that we saw that came out in court. So the Civilian Complaints Commission looked into it. You have the report, but when I speak to Indigenous advisors in F Division, they haven't heard anything about what the RCMP thinks of it, what they're going to do about it. They say it's like dealing with a black hole, and that black hole is about the lack of trust. So when is that report going to be released?
Well, they started the investigation in 2016. We received the report at the end of January 2020. They put a lot of thought into that report and into that investigation, and it is very important that we do the same when we look at those recommendations. I personally have read the report already. Usually I wait till our analysts go through it and do a sort of a scrub down of, but I wanted to put my attention to it early on so that there would not be unnecessary delays, because often what happens is we look at it, we see what we've done and what we can do, and there's a lot of work, and do we agree with the recommendation or don't we? I personally looked at the report. Most of the recommendations I see no issue with, and it will make us a better police agency because of it, and my goal is to have that report out in the fall.
Okay. Because let's talk about another report that came forward, and this was in New Brunswick 7 years ago with the RCMP heavily militarized response to the First Nation community defending themselves against the fracking. And I was very shocked because I've dealt with Indigenous protest in RCMP, and seeing sniper crews with sniper rifles was something that I found really shocking. A report was done. That's 7 years ago. The report, I believe you've had it for most of your tenure. When is that report going to be released?
The report is no longer with the RCMP, it's with the CRCC. We are finished, we have done a review, and the CRCC got it a couple of weeks ago.
Okay.
There's lots of, like I said, there's a lot of recommendations in that report. Again, that report was investigated over 6 years. There was 2 or 3 terabytes of information that had to be reviewed. So we wanted to make sure that we did the proper review because people deserve that.
I get that. I guess the issue is that we saw with the Wet'suwet'en a repeat of what happened in New Brunswick. Again, RCMP heavy militarized with sniper rifles, targeting unarmed protesters. And in the reports that we saw from the duty commanders that talk about the need for lethal overwatch. So to have a discussion about demilitarizing and de-escalating when people are being confronted with sniper rifles, the exact same pattern that we saw in New Brunswick, and the New Brunswick report's still not out. There's been nothing done on the Wet'suwet'en. How do I go back to Indigenous communities and say, no, this is not an occupying force that's going to threaten you if you stand up for your land? Sniper rifles, lethal overwatch, is that not representing something that is much more militarized than necessary in dealing with a nation-to-nation relationship? I
can say that our response to the Indigenous protests in northern BC, there was no use of force used on people. People were arrested. But the sniper rifles, it was unprecedented.
Would you suggest that that's okay?
The work that we did with that community and connecting with the hereditary chiefs, and we had actually lots of discussion, and it was very operationally, it was a success.
So, but then why was it the need, quote, for lethal overwatch? Lethal, the definition, is causing death, capable of causing death.
When we use certain types of resources, for example, when we had public order individuals, they are unarmed. So they have no arming. So we always, just in case there is something that happens or goes sideways, they need to be protected. So that they
certainly,
have
but isn't that the
what's
difference
called
between
armed
a sniper watch and just police having their normal sidearms as you would have at a normal event?
specialized team, the emergency response team, was in the background. There was armed members in their uniform overwatching that incident.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
There, thank you.
for your
Mr. Morrison, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks Gail and Dennis for being here. So I have two questions, one HR and one for our contract. A concern I have, and it was brought up, Commissioner, you brought it up, and thanks for staying for the extra hour as well, was hiring the right person was one, and then the minister brought up a similar issue about hiring, and that was to people who understand the cultural diversity of communities. So the concern I have is when you recruit individuals who understand and embrace cultural diversity and those that want to embrace small communities, for example, would the hiring of new RCMP recruits not be much better if they were hired by the provinces and territories, if they took the lead based on regional priorities? Now, I know how the system works. What I'm asking, would it be better if they based hiring on a point-based system that suits that province, not Ottawa?
You raise an excellent point, and one of the projects that we are looking at, we used to have a special constable program, for example, where people from their community could be trained, a modified training, where they could go back to their community. And we sort of got away from it because it was sort of, they said it was a tiered system. But I think with the right checks and balances, I know when talking to the territories, they are very anxious to look at that. Also, we need to ensure, for example, we have a great recruiting project going on in Nunavut, where people who don't have access to get some of the skills that are needed to be a police officer, we're actually training them in Nunavut to be prepared to come to our training academy. So they don't have access to a lot of driving, for example. We're providing that access. But I think we need more than one way to get into the RCMP, not just the traditional way.
Good answer. And here's another good question for a contract. As the RCMP does not have a minimum standard for contract policing, has the RCMP ever thought of maybe having a minimum policing standard that you can go and do rural policing reviews, for example, in different contract provinces, and to see whether or not the minimum standard of policing is adequate? Because I hear so often of the strain and stress of smaller detachments, for example, that just there is not enough people there, and yet the only relief is through the province, and that's how the contract works. So could the RCMP have a minimum standard to say to the province, if you want to contract an RCMP member, you will have to have this number of people?
You raise another excellent point in the sense that our business intelligence is not strong in that area. We have what's called a police resourcing methodology. It is so labor intense to figure out how many police officers we need in a given area. In a place like Vancouver or Toronto, it's very easy to do because it's in one geographical location. But when you're dealing in the north where somebody might have to go on a snowmobile or a boat to a complaint, it's very hard to measure the time and distance, geography, or flying to another community because we don't have police detachments in every community. So to do that ratio, it's very labor intensive, and divisions can only do 2 of those a year. So we need better intelligence to say this is how many people or police officers we need to adequately to police your community.
Okay.
Absolutely.
One of my last questions is the management review system in the RCMP, MRs, that I don't know why, but since 2018, the MRs have stopped in British Columbia. And I'm just wondering, if you don't have a management review, how do you possibly help detachments or units that need direction? Perhaps, for example, let's pick racism, let's pick diversity. And I'm not too sure I understand the thought process behind not doing management reviews. How are you, or how are your management teams addressing the needs of these detachments that need help before you get to a directed review, which means you're in trouble?
No, you're absolutely right. We need that level of oversight. I know,
what happened
at the detachment level, as far as I know, they still have, they have their annual performance plan, which includes the unit level quality assurance process, and they review each activity to see if there is risks that need to be addressed, and it's supposed to feed up into the management review.
Right.
I'm going to look into that. I commit to that because I was pretty sure that I know when I was district officer in 3 different districts, we had that nailed down. As much as we didn't like it, we had it.
Thank you, Mr. Morris and Madame Cara. 5 minutes, please.
I think Greg.
Okay, well,
Okay.
Mr.
Perfect.
Fergus? Okay, Mr. Fergus, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Very kind of you of giving me this opportunity to ask a question. Thank you, Madam Commissioner. It's a pleasure to have you here today. First of all, I would like to say that I recognize the work, the difficult work in the RCMP that all the members do on a daily basis. It's not easy to be a police officer. It's not easy to have the attention drawn to exceptions, and I understand that it's very difficult. However, it is the burden that you and all the members of the RCMP have to take on, and it is part of the attention that is thrown upon you right now. Now, I can't answer the question from Mr. Sangarine, but I was also confused by your definition of systemic racism. When this question was asked of you at the beginning of June, I sincerely believe that people can change, and we have to give them the opportunity to evolve, to change. So congratulations. But to come back to Mrs. Michaud's question, I'd like to once again get your definition of systemic racism, because you said, and you've introduced a notion of length. You talked about the history of the RCMP, and you recognize that there was systemic racism. Do you believe that there is systemic racism today in the RCMP?
Thank you for your question. And first, thank you for your appreciation for our members, because it means a lot. They're working hard each day in the communities that they serve in. Yes, there's absolutely systemic racism. I can give you a couple of examples that we've found over the years. For example, we have a physical abilities a requirement evaluation. It's an obstacle course. In there, there's a 6-foot mat that you have to do a broad jump. And when we put the lens on it and reviewed that physical requirements test, evidence told us that the average person can broad jump their height. So, of course, how many 6-foot people do we hire? And there are people in all different cultures that may not be 6 feet, including there's not a lot of women that are 6 feet tall. That would not be able to get through that type of test.
So that would be systemic discrimination, but I'm trying to think of systemic racism.
In our, we have some questions, for example, in our aptitude test. And you know what, I might refer Gail, because that is Gail's specialty in the HR world, because a lot of it has been brought out in our recruiting process. I'll ask Gail if she can.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for the question. First, I'd just like to say, when we talk about systemic racism, we understand it to mean because of systems that exist in organizations over a long time, they disadvantage certain racialized Indigenous groups. So institutional racism that differentially impacts people. And so we do have some examples. I will say that when we were looking at our recruitment process and what was required for our folks when we tried to recruit people from the north, because of remote locations, the need for driver's license, etc., they had a difficult time actually coming to write the aptitude test, actually having driver's license, and actually coming and leaving to come and sit for the processes we had. We recognized that this was this was disadvantaging that group. And so we've changed the way we do that process now so that we make it easier, so that we go there and we do certain of the activities there so that we can make sure that they continue to have the opportunity to apply to become police officers. So that's an example.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. I have very little time left. The minister mentioned that when he was chief of the Toronto Police Force, he took great efforts to making sure that the management of the police force looked like the diversity of the city in which he served. Is there any intention for the RCMP to make its management to look like the diversity that exists in Canada?
Absolutely. We work very hard to ensure that we increase the diversity at all levels. And we're doing better, but you know what? Not good enough. We need to do it better, and we need to bring people up and develop them within the employees that we already have, because if we don't, then when it comes to the next commissioner, if we don't develop anybody with diversity, how are we going to offer up people that can represent our communities?
Thank you, Mr. Fergus.
Thank you for your
Monsieur
question.
Paulus, 5 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
You have 5 minutes, Mr. Paulus. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Commissioner. At the beginning of the meeting, I talked about different reports that have been published over the last few years. In 2014, there was a report saying entitled Invisible Women. It was on the MMIWG, and this was on the police. And of course, we know the inquiry that took place in 2018 with a huge report that was published in Recommendation 1632 that is asking the police service, especially the RCMP, that the Inuit be represented amongst police officers and civilian society. How are you going to implement this recommendation?
We have started a special recruitment process in Nunavut for Inuit people that includes we've identified people interested in the RCMP, and we are working with them. Right now we have 7. It's a pilot project. 7 people were recently identified in January, and we are going through giving them the skills that they don't have access to, like driving, or if they require certain educational components so that can help them with their learning of police studies. We are giving them that learning in Nunavut before they go to the RCMP Training Academy. We will look at every single piece that we can do in Nunavut to help them succeed. We will do there instead of bringing them down to the RCMP Training Academy. We're also looking at a troop specific, and we've done this before, specific with Inuit candidates or Indigenous candidates in the north, as opposed to people, let's say, south of the 55th parallel, bringing specifically, because they have very unique needs, and it's very difficult for people who have never been away from home to all of a sudden send them to a training academy in Regina for 6 months. So we need to, again, we have to be open and flexible for all of those diverse options, so in order to attract the most diverse population.
Merci.
Thank you. My next question could perhaps be addressed to Mrs. Johnson or for yourself. We've heard and seen amongst Indigenous peoples, and specifically, there were some young Indigenous people who wanted to become an RCMP officer, and they were going through harassment from their own communities. Is this something that we see still today? Is it a reality?
What I can say is I can't speak to specifically if they've been harassed in their own community, but I think somebody mentioned it earlier. It's all about people trusting their police. And so if they don't trust the police, it doesn't matter if you get people from that community, they're still the police. They're still wearing a uniform. They're still part of that system. So we need to look at that, but also we need to provide them with the skills and and knowledge to come back to their community, because I think a community-driven response is much better than an Ottawa or an RCMP from the top-driven response.
Merci. Je veux profiter.
Thank you. I'd like to take the opportunity that you are here with us today. We're still managing a COVID-19 pandemic. And at the RCMP in Canada, we are starting to deconfine or open up a bit. I would like to know if the situation is under control. Do you expect a second wave in the fall?
We made some, in the RCMP when COVID-19 hit, we made some very difficult decisions within our organization. And it probably has contributed, along with what's happened recently, to the morale. We canceled all leave. We canceled all training. People had to quarantine before they could go up north because we wanted to be the most responsible and not to bring COVID-19 up to the north. Within our organization, those difficult decisions have paid off. Out of 30,000 employees, we've only had 27 employees test positive for COVID, 17 of which were on the front line. Will there be a second wave? I'm not a doctor, but I don't think we can take COVID-19 for granted.
Mr. Balduz, Madame Cara.
Thank you, Madam Commissioner. There have been some calls for the reconstructing of the RCMP to remove contract policing or to remove the designation royal or to rename the force in other ways that would distance it from Canada's past. Is the RCMP aware of these calls, or do you have any mechanism currently in place to examine them?
I think under our modernization efforts, like I said, no stone will be left unturned, and one of them is a review of contract policing. But I have to say, having now being in this position and exposed to police agencies from around the world, our model, as much as sometimes it's criticized, is the envy of most police agencies because of its flexibility and nimbleness in times of crisis. I can give you numerous examples. The manhunt in northern Manitoba, where we could bring resources in and not put the rest of the province, make the rest of the province vulnerable because we had to move resources around. We could bring fresh resources in. Fires in Fort McMurray, and we had a terrorism file in Kingston, and it takes a lot of specialized resources, which you can't afford to have in each area. We could draw from each province and bring those specialized resources in, deal with the file, and they could return to their place. So it is a great model, but it needs to be resourced accordingly, and we have to make sure that it's in the proper footprint with the proper resources. So thank you for that question.
Thank you. I'd like to give my the rest of my time to Mr. Greg Fergus.
Thank you very much, Ms. Carr. Quick question on you had mentioned at the front end or in your opening comments that 99% of police RCMP interactions are of the non-lethal interventions. Is that correct?
99.9 actually.
99.9, even higher. Wouldn't that then make us rethink about the approach that we take? I mean, should we plan for that 0.1%, or should we have police officers approach a situation in a way that would calm spirits down, clearly de-escalated, or do they need to always go in with, fully armed and ready to go and looking, raising tension?
That's a great question. Thank you for that. They have to be prepared for everything, but your point is well taken. And in 2016, we introduced de-escalation and crisis intervention for that very reason. Our calls to mental health are growing exponentially. I think we were looking at the statistics, more than close to 10,000 calls a month or more just on mental health crisis.
And are we putting too much emphasis or too much of a burden on the RCMP to handle those kind of telephone calls? Or is it better for us to look at having other services that are better funded, more specialized services on mental health, on drug addiction, that could work in cooperation with the RCMP to go and respond to those situations?
In a perfect world, I would say yes. When I was the district officer in northern Manitoba in Thompson, we policed half of the province. And in that entire half of the province, there was not one addiction center. So anybody who needed addictions counseling had to go down south. So yes, in a perfect world, if those resources were available. But when you look at Toronto or in Ottawa or Lower Mainland, it's a different story than what are the majority of the areas where we police. We have, in Nunavut, we have 7 or 8 two-person detachments, and there is no social services. Anytime there's social services needed, they need to go to Iqaluit for a lot of that because those communities do not have that. So the police are the first responders for all of that. And that's the reality. It's not a fair reality, but it is the reality.
Could I presume then that you would agree that we need a big rethink in terms of how to increase security in a larger term, in a larger understanding of Canadians by taking a look at who should specialize in what and what resources should be directed as a result?
There is a lot of schools of thought, and people are saying maybe when we are recruiting, we should be recruiting people from the social services industry and bringing them over to the police. That's one aspect, integrating the services together for a better response. Focusing, looking at our training academy, and you mentioned it, focusing on de-escalation if, in fact, like I said, 0.073% of our interventions are with a use of force option. So we need to put that balance back on communication, de-escalation skills, communication skills, connecting with people in crisis.
Thank you, Mr. Fergus. Madame Michaud, 2.5 minutes, and Mr. Angus, 2.5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner, do you have the numbers of the statistics for the past few years for the number of RCMP interventions with cultural minority groups or Indigenous groups compared to the regular population?
No, actually, I think I mentioned it early when Minister Blair was there. It was always believed that to be bias-free, you should not collect racial data. And now we are rethinking that because, like I said, in order to bring change to marginalized or to racialized communities, we need to have that data. And so we are going to work, like I said to Mr. Angus, we are going to work with the Privacy Commissioner to see how we can collect those statistics and how we can use those statistics to alter our police delivery.
Merci. Je pense en effet que...
Thank you. I think that, yes, it could lead to certain stereotypes, as you say, but at the same time, it could make sure that we can document racial profiling, for example. What do you think?
Yes, it would definitely help us to look at the racial disparities and obviously ways to address it, because if that is, those statistics would be crucial for that.
Merci.
Thank you. Now, in Canada's public accounts, in 2019, we learned that the RCMP spent significant amounts, nearly double than the previous year, in terms of settling various complaints and lawsuits. Could you tell us more about how these sums were allocated or provided? Was it because of police violence, for an out-of-court settlement, or following a court case?
Have those statistics. Much of our litigation, not much, but meaning, for example, our fleet, for example, is not insured because our fleet is so big it would be too costly. So whenever we deal with any type of vehicle collision, it is through litigation. Through that settlement, which is actually cheaper, much cheaper than carrying insurance, because we are police officers do high-risk driving, so it's elevated rates, obviously, even though we're trained to do that high-risk driving. That's just one example. Unfortunately, I don't have the specific statistics for you.
Thank you, Madame Michaud. Mr. Angus, 2.5 minutes.
Thank you. We're not under the RCMP and Treaty 9, it's OPP and NAPS, but we have many two-person detachments, young people, very idealistic, and then they're living in great isolation, servicing without support for mental health, midst of an opioid crisis, and then a suicide crisis hits. And we're seeing kids 9 and 10 years old dying, and it's the police are in there all the time dealing with it. We've had a number of traumas, we've had a number of suicides. People don't like to talk about it, but the effect on front line. So what do you have to ensure the mental health of the workers who are on these front lines in we have some of the highest suicide rates in the world, would be under the communities that you represent?
When we speak about the mental health and well-being of our members, we can't do enough. Absolutely. We're doing the first of its kind in the world, a longitudinal PTSD study out of the training academy, where we follow the cadets for 5 years to see what triggers PTSD so we can be better at prevention. We are having operational stress injury clinicians in each province. Maybe I could pass it to Gail. I know there's... Okay.
Enough time.
Sorry. No time for Gail.
Sorry about that. Certainly, the Rangers, junior Rangers in our region, they're a lifeline. But I wanted to just close on the effects with COVID, because many of our communities had to shut down entirely, and they've done enormous work to keep COVID out, but under enormous pressure, and it's just ramped up the pressure. So for police going in, what are the terms and conditions that they're facing in going into communities that are shutting themselves down and insisting on very strong isolation?
Yes, for us, when COVID started, we actually, every police officer that went into the territories had to self-isolate outside of the communities in Winnipeg or Ottawa. We did not want to be bringing COVID to the northern communities. We still have that. All of our relief workers self-isolated before they went there. Absolutely. And when we talk about mental health, it's interesting because the numbers have spiked since COVID, because it's very difficult situation. We are social human beings, and we need to socialize. And when you take that away, and with the Indigenous population having social distancing ceremonies, that's nobody's used to that. I just watched my sister's wedding on Zoom on Saturday, and I had an unfortunate, my nephew committed suicide during COVID, and I have yet to go home to be with my family on that, and we have had no celebration. The effects are devastating, and it's something that we will never fully understand, and I'm sure that it will be long term.
Thank you, Mr. Angus. And just a chair's prerogative question. The RCMP is about to enter into a relationship with a union, long time coming. In the United States and possibly even other police forces here in Canada, the unions have frequently been a huge problem, particularly protecting officers who by any other circumstances should have been let go. What assurances can you give as the commissioner and possibly even as the chief of the human resources that this does not become a problem, and that the union is, how should we say, on the same page as the RCMP as far as dealing with officers who are clearly a problem?
Thank you for that question, Mr. Chair. I would love to say I could give you some guarantees. Obviously, I can't. But our union focus has been based on relationship building, and I've had conversations with our union president. Unfortunately, they have not been able to go into negotiations because of COVID, but I have stressed time and time again that we have an unprecedented opportunity to be the envy of all police unions in the world, not just in North America, not just in Canada. and we will base that on mutual respect and holding members to account that need to be held to account. And I believe that in those discussions, I have said we don't want to be in conflict, and I will take a nudge anytime, but I won't appreciate getting thrown under the bus. And I think that relationship of mutual respect and the fact that we want to guard that, because our relationship before with our divisional representatives was exactly that. And so we have decided to work together to do that, so we do have one of the strongest, most fair police unions that we can have.
Thank you, Madam Commissioner and your colleagues. With that, that brings our first meeting to an end. I remind all parties that we have witness lists to be finalized by the submission by the end of Thursday, I believe. Is that correct? Okay. So with that, meeting's adjourned.
Thank you, Chair.